Good. Okay, so we have a lot of entrepreneurs here. That's great. We are going to talk about a topic that is dear to every entrepreneur's heart, which is money. Where is the money going to come from? And I've got some great panelists who have very different perspectives on this. So with that introduction, we've been asked to talk about various modalities of fundraising, and probably the easy ones on Kumar's list to get rid of are ICOs and crowdfunding. So let me throw it open to the panel. Who's seeing ICOs these days or crowdfunding as a major vehicle?
I would say ICOs, a year ago I was getting about 50 to 75 a week in my inbox, and we invested in 0. I'd say that was down to like 2 or 3, and then as the crypto world's sort of gone up a little bit in the last month or two, it's trickled up. But there's, my personal view is that the whole ICO market's pretty much dead. Utility tokens, I think, will mostly all go to 0, and it's not a great place to put money from our perspective. And I think security tokens, are solving a problem that not everyone has. So we'll see. An experiment yet to be run.
Anyone else have any experience with ICOs?
We've avoided any company doing an ICO, and we've also avoided companies doing crowdfunding because for the types of companies that we do, that tends not to be a great early source of capital.
We did 4 token sales last year in the private market, so not any of the public ICOs. I think that ICOs going forward is going to be a very interesting thing to watch. I think in large part the whole market has died down because of the SEC, lots of crackdowns on fraud, which I think in general is a very good thing. But I think also it makes the regulatory landscape very difficult for US companies to do that. Singapore is a different story, so I think it's something that we're sort of waiting and seeing. But I think at the end of the day, we're trying to invest in startups, so we're looking at it from the perspective of what is the entry point and the exit point, whether it's on a token basis or an equity basis, or what do we think it could be.
So it sounds like ICOs are either dead or close to dead? Is that what I'm hearing from the panel? Pretty much,
yeah,
okay.
In the US at least.
So any of you guys who are thinking about it, forget it. These guys aren't gonna, okay. So next, how about crowdfunding? I think Neal addressed it a little bit. You aren't into that.
Yeah, for the kinds of companies that we do, which are all very deep tech, they shouldn't need crowdfunding. What they really need are knowledgeable domain experts as angels, which is really hard to get through crowdfunding. So if they have to resort to crowdfunding, they're probably not the right kind of company for us.
I think crowdfunding in general is a great thing for entrepreneurs. We don't participate in crowdfunding deals, but we have done direct deals with startups that have done crowdfunding. So a couple of examples of this, actually probably the best one is one of our portfolio companies, which is actually called The Hustle. It's a media company. Media companies just in general have a really hard time raising VC. What they did was they did a crowdfunding campaign with their hundreds of thousands of subscribers at the time, and it was filled within 48 hours, and they got their whole fundraising done that way. And these days they're like an 8-figure business, and so I think crowdfunding isn't a bad signal for a startup, in my opinion. I think it's just really hard in general to raise lots of money at the earliest stages, and it's a great option for entrepreneurs to use if they need it.
Yeah, I would say at the early stages, it's very difficult to raise money via a crowdfunding site. I know some of the founders of some of the sites, and in general, it's companies that already have more traction that are going to get attention, and it's particularly consumer companies because most of the investors there are individuals, and you sort of invest in what you know and understand. Also, in our experience within our portfolio, companies that are able to use crowdfunding sites fall in 2 categories. One, what Elizabeth just said, if you can crowdfund from your own customers or your own user base, that can often be successful. Or you can use it to sort of finish off a round. So if you've got a sort of well-known lead investor and you've got $600,000 of an $800,000 round raised, you can use it to raise that last $200,000 pretty successfully. It's really, really hard to go on and say, I'm going to raise an $800,000 round and start from 0 on a crowdfunding site. In our experience, that just doesn't work.
I just read that half of the crowdfunding campaigns fail. Half. And then to be able to win and be viable, you really have to know where the money's going to come from in the beginning. And so you're doing all the marketing, you're seeding it, then eventually when you put the campaign out, it's already pre-seeded and the money's ready to come in.
Yeah, it's sort of, a lot of what's going on is really it acts as a platform that you drive sort of you drive your own traffic to the crowdfunding site, to your profile, you know, and that's how a lot of it gets done, yeah.
Okay, so we got rid of the first two that were really the last two on our list. So let's talk about really viable sources of funding for a startup and start with seed capital. So I know there are lots of perspectives on the panel about that. Who wants to kick it off? What do you look for in seed? Do you do seed investing?
So this is a tricky question because it's sort of what is seed? Because seed, for an investor, like a VC, in the VC world, the term seed means something completely different than it does for entrepreneurs. So if you ask an entrepreneur, you know, when are you at the seed stage for your business? It's when you're sort of anywhere from you're building the product to you've just got it out generating some revenue, you're sort of trying to figure out your business model. That's what you consider seed. And on the investor side of the fence, seed is anything before, you know, a 5 million plus Series A. So most companies raising a quote unquote seed round from the VC world are raising a round, and it might be their third round of funding for the company, and the company probably has 50 to 100,000 of revenue and pretty much has a proven business model and is growing. So you have this challenge that seed means very different things. So if you're asking from the entrepreneur side, how do you raise that really early capital when you're trying to sort of prove out your business model? That's harder these days. It gets, you know, because it's cheaper and cheaper to build a product and get it out to market. There's that many more companies doing it, and fundraising is a marketplace, so it's harder to stand out. So I'd say for the most part, at the really early stages, it's friends, family, personal network, angels who are investing in this because it's you, not necessarily because it's the idea. And then if you can start getting some revenue and get some traction, that's when you start to get the professional world, the very early stages of the professional world, to generally start to look at you.
So you're saying don't go out for seed money until you've got a product. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's exceptions to everything because fundraising is a tail-driven market, but if you're talking about that middle 80%, you know, in most traditional tech spaces, you know, if you get into biotech and, you know, infrastructure, stuff like that, you just need a lot of capital out of the gate. But if you're a software company, yeah, you're wasting your time talking to professional investors generally without revenue.
And I think building off of that point, if we were to get more specific, I'd say actually the seed landscape looks more like pre-seed, seed, and post-seed, where pre-seed is such a ridiculous word, right? Like, what does pre-seed really mean? But I think what people mean by it is the stage that's different from seed, as David's mentioned, like squarely in the seed stage, typical numbers that we're talking about might be like 30K per month in revenue. So that's early, but not that early when you think about it. So the stage before that is, okay, you've got maybe a product out there and some revenue, but not at the 30K per month level. And that pre-seed stage, to Dave's point, is just really hard. Like, I can count the number of pre-seed stage funds on one hand, us being one of them, Precursor being another one, Notation Capital, et cetera. And so your chances of getting funding from a VC at that stage is just really slim from a numbers perspective. And so angels, people you know very well, is probably your best source of fundraising, or bootstrapping it at that stage until you actually get some good revenue to move into the seed stage. And the true seed stage actually has a lot more optionality.
So what do you look for in a pre-seed company?
For us, and this will differ a lot amongst our peers, but for us, we care a lot about the customer acquisition and perceived unit economics. So it's entirely gut-based. Like, when I see a company this early, I don't know if it'll be a hit or not, right? We all don't know, and there's going to be a lot of luck there. And so what am I looking for? I think based on past experience in building businesses, you know, all three of us on the GP base are former entrepreneurs. And what we're looking for is, like, what do we think the sales cycle will be like? What do we think the unit economic spread is? Like, at scale, do we think the lifetime value could be X, and what do we think it will cost them to get there? And if that spread is too tight, we probably won't do that deal. And this is just based on our own gut, right? There's no amount of data that you can show us at that stage that would convince us, because by definition it's pre-seed. And so that's why I say it's really difficult, because it's our interpretation and gut feeling and intuition, which could be completely wrong, and it's probably going to be wrong in many cases, you know, versus the entrepreneurs.
So what do you do if you have an idea and a business plan? Forget it, don't go to you, because you have no unit economics yet and LTVs?
Well, I think, so one of the things that I would do is actually probably skip the business plan altogether. And so you start, and I think the very first thing that every entrepreneur should do, regardless of the business, is figure out what is the biggest risk here. So if it's a highly technical idea, it's like, maybe the hypothesis around, if we do ABC, will this work? Like I have a company, for example, that's a LiDAR company, and they have a thesis around how to build a new LiDAR system. So their biggest risk is technical rather than market. But then for a B2B software company, like a new CRM or whatever, like how do you think you are going to get customers? And what is the biggest risk around that? That is probably the market risk is probably the biggest risk. So I would, whatever it is, try to, as much as you can, de-risk that for yourself first. Forget about me, but try to do that before you write any plans or anything. And that will start to give you a sense of like, what could this turn out to be in terms of order of magnitude of the numbers and all that.
So go ahead and talk to customers.
In most cases, yes.
Okay, Neal.
So it's interesting because we've done lots of seed deals, and none of them have had revenue or been anywhere close to revenue, because the stage that we get involved with is largely when they're still developing the product or perfecting the technology. So what we look for at that point is more like what Elizabeth was describing about her LiDAR company. So we do want to see kind of a proof of concept that the science is real, but then what we'll be backing is the entrepreneur and their team's capability in getting the engineering done, which still has a lot of unknowns. But at that time, we're backing a couple of things. We're backing the team's ability to make the product, perfect the technology, and the market diligence that we do is really around just validating that there is a market, and again, you don't need a huge amount of data for that. And then secondly, if it's something relatively new, when we say, is there a market, what we're talking about are, do the physics of the market work? Is there an actual value proposition here that if you got to the right people, and if you communicated in the right way, and if you did X, Y, Z, would induce someone to actually use this because there's some benefit there. So we're usually much more focused on the underlying kind of physics of the market and then the ability of the team to get it done. And so the seed deals typically are ones where a company may be raising, often the entrepreneurs will have spent some of their own money to develop that first proof of concept. But then they're raising anywhere between 500,000 to sometimes 3 million to get the product done. And that often happens with a combination of angels, high net worth entrepreneurs who've made money on previous deals and who usually know something about the space or know the entrepreneurs who are doing the company. So that's one source. And the other source there are in fact a number of VC firms that will go in early at that stage and take a couple of $100,000 positions, hoping that some of those companies then graduate to the next phase.
I think one thing I want to distinguish here, though, is if you're talking about like deep tech, which is what Neal's talking about, or like a software business where it's, you can build it. It's very clear that somebody can build it, but the bigger risk is market risk, and the way that investors see those are very different. Like for us, we do both. So with a deep tech idea, such as the LiDAR company I mentioned, like we look at it much more from Neal's approach. But for like where the risk is market, like a new, let's just call it new CRM, then it's all about the customer acquisition. So that's sort of the distinguishing thing. So depending on what your idea is.
All right, so let's go on. Let's go forward. Is this on? Yeah. Let's go forward to angels. So I know some of you talked a bit about angels while we were talking about seed, but angels are a separate category. There are angel groups, and then there are individual angels, just high net worth individuals who just will invest independently. So your perspective on angels, on how useful they are, how accessible they are, whether groups versus individuals is better. Dave, why don't you just take that off?
Okay. Well, I mean, angels are an incredibly important part of the ecosystem. I would say that in most of our deals that we do, there are some angel investors that are in the deals as well. Often, they've been talking to the company before we come in and maybe lead the round. There's, angel market is probably the largest source of very early seed stage capital. But I think the angel market's changed a lot over time as well. I think it's easier from individual angels. You can sometimes get those early checks, and often it's because you're in a sector that angel, whatever you're doing resonates with them, or you personally do. I think what we've seen across the country is over the last decade, most angel groups have gotten larger and a lot more sort of organized and structured, and they behave a lot more like seed VC funds, and they have often more onerous and structured processes. So it can, an individual angel, you can get a yes or no from pretty quickly. Most angel groups, there'll be exceptions to this though, it's a 2 to 5 month process. So you just sort of have to know what you're getting into and sort of make sure everything aligns with your fundraising needs and
But do you think they're better to work with because they're more savvy about how these things work and what doing a startup is like, or are you better off with an individual who's not quite so demanding?
You mean are the groups better than an individual?
Yeah.
It depends. I don't think there's a right or a wrong there. I mean, in all instances, sometimes you're just getting money, and sometimes you're getting money and a person who's got a lot of domain expertise and experience and will roll up their sleeves and help you a lot. And sometimes that person that rolls up their sleeves and helps you a lot helps you, and sometimes they hinder you. But I can tell you that's also true with VCs. So that's true at every stage of investor that you work with.
Great. Okay, who wants to add to that opinion or disagree? Go ahead, Neal.
We love angels. So.
Why do you love angels?
Well, the right angels can be very helpful to a company. They provide it credibility and validation. That's something that is, important for a company to get early on, especially in a situation where they're building deep tech. So somebody who's spent their life in that field and who's willing to both put their money and their name behind that counts for a lot. So for us, it's a form of diligence in a sense. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the money is very helpful. So,
Elizabeth?
I think one thing to add on to Dave's point is I don't think you have to have every investor be, quote, value add. Like sometimes you just need to fill your round and you'll take, quote, dumb money. I think that's perfectly fine. I think the flip side though is you don't want anyone on your cap table, whether they're a VC or an angel, be a real pain in the butt. Like you don't want that annoying person calling you every day. You don't want people threatening you with weird things. So I think that is probably the bigger thing to look out for, and that will vary a lot by obviously individual and also by group.
Great. So I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor. While you're doing that, I'll add while thinking of your questions, add my comment, which is I deal with a lot of angel groups. And I was just at a conference where they were talking about having a 2% acceptance rate. So when I was feeling bad that my companies haven't gotten angel investment, I felt better to hear how low the acceptance rate was. But that's still not a good thing, right? So dealing with an angel group it's really very much like dealing with a VC. They go through diligence, they have screening committees, they bring you in for a first look, they bring you in for a second, maybe third, et cetera. So it's tough to get angel investment. And so just to add a perspective to all this, it's different. Okay, how about a question or two from the audience? Anyone want to ask this outstanding panel? Yes, yell it out. Okay.
Oh, hi, panel. I'm a startup co-founder, and one of the biggest problem I see is that we go with POC, as Mr. Neal mentioned, and then, we are told the feedback is, to come back later. So what usually goes on behind thinking of the early stage investors, even though we have few customers who are piloting it, but it's not paid. So just would like to hear some thoughts of your expertise on that. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. And you're a software company or?
Yes, we're a software company.
So the reality is that one of the challenges on the entrepreneurial side is fundraising is a marketplace. So investors aren't looking at any individual startup in isolation. Every investor, whether they're sort of consciously doing it or not, is saying, all right, you're trying to raise $500,000 at a $4 million valuation. How do you look to the universe of other companies that are raising that similar round size at that valuation? And so, as it's gotten easier or cheaper and cheaper to build a software product and get it to market, you've got a greater number of companies, particularly when they have technical founders, that get one out there and start generating revenue with anywhere from no to not that much revenue raised. And so the reality is you have to compete with that. And so it's not necessarily a fair marketplace, but it is. So, you know, that's sort of the quick answer. And some areas are just, that punishes them. If you're a hardware company, it's almost impossible these days because it takes so much more money and multiples aren't that high. So it's difficult.
Okay, how about another question? Somebody, are you guys lined up?
Yes.
I can barely see. Okay, come on up. Yell it out.
Hi, it's going to be my first time starting this company, and you guys talked about seed funding, you defined it, but I also heard pre-seed. So Elizabeth talked about pre-seed. So what is the difference between pre-seed and seed?
That's for Elizabeth. She talked about
Right, so there's, I would say in the early stage landscape before Series A, there's pre-seed, seed, and post-seed. And if I had to put, you know, numbers around it, like pre-seed is very early, maybe you have a product, but limited traction. Seed is, you know, you have a product and you have a fair bit of traction. And for a software startup, your run-of-the-mill software startup, they might be doing like 30K per month. I mean, obviously that's not a hard and fast rule, but just to give you a sense benchmarking. And then post-seed is probably the old Series A, which used to be sort of touted around the $1 million run rate mark. So roughly 80, you know, whatever, 80K per month or whatever that is. So these are all rough numbers and it will vary a lot, but that's kind of the three buckets. And so you want to make sure you're approaching investors who participate in sort of the bucket that you're in.
Yeah.
So that was, the answer wasn't zero. You have to have revenue to be
right.
pre-seed.
If a professional fund that's a pre-seed investor still is investing in companies that probably have anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 a month in revenue usually, and the round sizes could be anywhere from like 250 to 750. You know, the traditional seed investors, you know, usually it's more like 30 to 100,000 a month in revenue, and the round sizes are more like 750 to 2.5 million. And when you get to post-seed, it's probably 80 or 100,000 plus, and you know, the round sizes are, you know, 2 to 4 million.
This is for a software business.
Yeah, these are just the more generic tech software businesses. You know, deep tech,
Deep tech is a different
biotech,
category.
you know, there's a lot of things that are sort of exceptions, and all of that goes out the window.
Okay,
Thank you.
One last question before we have to stop.
Yeah, so this is, I love the point about deep tech and how it's measured, not necessarily having revenue, and the one about market risk and where you have some revenue metrics, right? And so my question is, what about plans which don't have deep tech, but they have market validation, but they're more of the long game, so you're not necessarily going to see revenue for a while. Do you ever consider plans like that, or plans like that hopelessly dead? I mean, where the value proposition is very clear, and there's a game, but it's a long game.
How about Neal? You take that one.
So we do, but I guess the question is, what is creating the reason for that long game? Why is it going to take so long to get revenue if there's no real tech being developed?
Oh, in terms of building, so a great example would be, you know, if going back 20 years, you were starting a search engine and you didn't have your business model evident.
Like
that was the long game.
Yeah.
So that's an example of...
It probably depends on, you know, there are some venture firms that will invest in that, but in general, you have to be something where they view that you're going to be in a huge, you know, it's a huge market and there's just enormous potential. In that case, they'll take some really early flyers and they're sort of really building a farm system, giving you a small enough check size that if you happen to get on, you know, get some traction and sort of hit onto something, then you're going to be sort of there for what their normal stage check that they write would be. But again, if you're positioning yourself like that, you're sort of playing against the odds a bit. It's a lot harder to get funded.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
And you're also going against all, if you're, let's say it's a user-based game, you're also going against all other startups that are playing that game. Not even necessarily startups that are doing what you're doing, but everyone in, let's say, the consumer app space.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to need to stop here, so let's thank the panel.